Picture this. It's the summer of 1565. The most powerful empire on Earth has its eyes set on one tiny, barren rock in the middle of the Mediterranean. What happens next is the story of the Great Siege of Malta, a moment where the fate of Europe, believe it or not, truly hung in the balance.
And this is the man behind that empire, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Under his command, the Ottoman Empire was an absolute powerhouse, at the very peak of its glory. Its armies seemed totally unstoppable, sweeping across North Africa and pushing right to the gates of Vienna. But there was this one little thorn in his side. And in 1565, Suleiman decided it was time to finally crush it. The Sultan's target was the island of Malta, held by just a small band of warrior monks. And that brings us to the central question of this whole story. How in the world did a few thousand defenders manage to stop a full-blown invasion by an empire of 40,000? Seriously, how? Let's dive in.
First things first. To really get what a monumental fight this was, you have to understand the sheer, overwhelming power the defenders were up against. You see, by the mid-16th century, the Mediterranean was basically an Ottoman lake. They ran the show. Their next big goal? Pushing deeper into Europe. And Malta was the key. It was the stepping stone to Sicily, and from there to the Italian mainland itself. So from the Sultan's perspective, this strategic gateway simply had to be taken. So who were these people, these defenders standing in the way of a massive empire? Well, they weren't your average soldiers. They were a legendary order of, get this, warrior monks. Meet the Knights Hospitaller, an ancient military order. And you know, this wasn't their first rodeo with the Ottomans. Oh no. Back in 1522, Suleiman himself had personally kicked them out of their last fortress on the island of Rhodes. So from their new desolate home on Malta, they kept on being a major pain, raiding Ottoman ships whenever they got the chance. And what a home it was. Just look at the Grand Harbor. Its position, smack dab in the center of the Mediterranean, made it a critical naval base. It was like a dagger pointed right at the soft underbelly of Ottoman sea lanes, connecting east and west. But this conflict, it was also intensely personal. This was a showdown between two absolute titans. On one side, the 70-year-old Grand Master Jean de Valette, a hardened veteran. On the other, the equally old but unbelievably powerful Sultan Suleiman. For both of them, this was it. This was their final defining battle. So, after one too many of those pesky raids by the Knights, Suleiman finally snapped. He'd had enough. It was time for the empire to strike back with absolutely overwhelming force. The armada that set sail that spring was one of the largest anyone had seen in centuries. We have eyewitness accounts from the time, like from a soldier named Francisco Balbi, who put the total number of fighting men at around 40,000. And to face this massive invasion force, what did Grandmaster de Valette have? Just 6,100 men. That's it. This number included the knights, some foreign soldiers, and thousands of local Maltese militia who rose up to defend their homes. Balbi's account really gives us a staggering breakdown of just how outmatched they were. The defenders had only 500 Knights Hospitaller. They were going to face 6,000 of the Sultan's elite janissaries, some of the best soldiers on Earth. In every single category. The odds were almost unbelievable. The clash that followed was one of the most brutal and intense sieges in recorded history. For the defenders on that island, it was, quite simply, 4 months of hell. So, let's just quickly walk through the timeline. The Ottoman fleet arrives on May 18th. The fight kicks off with the assault on Fort St. Elmo. After it falls in a bloody battle, the fight moves to the main strongholds. Massive attacks in July and August are somehow thrown back, until finally a relief force shows up in September. Right at the start, the Ottoman commanders made a critical and ultimately fateful decision. Their first objective was Fort St. Elmo, that star-shaped fort guarding the entrance to the harbor. They needed that harbor to shelter their fleet, and they figured the fort would fall in just a few days. Oh, were they wrong. The 1,500 defenders of St. Elmo held out for an entire month against relentless round-the-clock bombardment. When the fort finally did fall, every last one of its defenders was killed, but they had cost the Ottomans 6,000 soldiers, including half of their irreplaceable janissaries, a truly catastrophic victory for the Turks.
And from there, the conflict just descended into pure savagery. After St. Elmo fell, the Ottoman commander floated the bodies of slain knights across the harbor on mock crucifixes. De Valette's response was equally grim. He had all his Turkish prisoners beheaded and then fired their heads from cannons right back into the Turkish camp. By late August, the Turkish forces were in a bad way, demoralized, riddled with disease, and with massive casualties. Desperate for an easy victory, they marched on the old, poorly defended capital city of Medina, hoping to finally secure a win.
But the city's governor came up with a stroke of pure genius. He ordered his few cannons to fire at the approaching army from an absurdly long range. And the bluff worked perfectly. The exhausted Turks heard the cannonade and just assumed the city was well supplied and ready for a long fight. They turned back without firing a single shot.
That moment, that incredible bluff, combined with the relentless fighting and the sickness spreading through their camp, well, it signaled the beginning of the end for the invaders. A victory was finally in sight for Malta, but it would be an incredibly costly one. On September 7th, the long-promised Spanish relief force, the Gran Soccorso, finally landed. And even though they were still outnumbered, they faced a broken and demoralized Ottoman army. The invaders were routed and forced into a full-scale retreat. But the victory came at a horrific price. The Ottomans may have lost up to 35,000 men. The knights lost a third of their order, and the people of Malta suffered terribly, losing a third of their entire population. The island was left in ruins.
So why did this battle matter so much? Because all of Europe had been watching, just holding its breath. As England's Queen Elizabeth I wrote, everyone understood the stakes. A Turkish victory in Malta could have kicked the door wide open for invasions into the rest of Europe.
The news of the victory echoed across the continent for centuries. The philosopher Voltaire would later declare, "Nothing is better known than the Siege of Malta." It became a legendary tale of heroism against truly impossible odds. So, what was the lasting impact? Well, first, it completely shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility at sea. Second, it led directly to the construction of a new, massive fortress city, Valletta, named after the Grand Master. And third, it helped unite Christian forces for another key naval victory at the Battle of Lepanto, just 6 years later. Today, if you go to the heart of Valletta, you can see this monument. It stands as a permanent reminder of the sacrifice and the extraordinary events of that long, bloody summer of 1565.
And so, the Great Siege of Malta leaves us with a powerful legacy. It proves that sometimes, in the right hands and with an absolutely unbreakable will, a tiny, strategic rock can become the very cornerstone of a continent's defense.